Hello, friends. It's Bill McKibben. My, do I wish I was there with you in person. The Sunshine Coast is one of my favorite places in the whole world. I've gotten to spend some time out at Half Moon Bay with my old and dear friend Naomi Klein and Avi Lewis, and it makes me wonder why I'm even bothering to talk to you, since you have some of the world's great experts on all this stuff right close to hand. And I also know that you're making huge progress on all this stuff right close to hand. I remember being there at the hospital in Seychelles and seeing the solar arrays and on and on and on. Um, so I'm very, very glad that you're doing this conference and thinking hard about how all this stuff fits together. Let me give you, just for a little while, my kind of overview about where we are. Um, as some of you know, I wrote the first book about what we now call the climate crisis, what we then called the greenhouse effect back in the 1980s. And it was not a cheerful book. In fact, its title was The End of Nature, and it was filled with all the predictions about what would happen if we did not stop burning fossil fuel and pouring carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. And despite the best efforts of writers such as myself, and despite a lot of other work that a lot of us have done over the intervening 4 decades, we didn't stop burning fossil fuel, and we poured a lot more carbon into the atmosphere. Um, and now all the predictions that people made about what that would mean have, of course, come true quicker and worse than what we would have thought back in the 1980s. We now see it every single day around us all over the place. And you guys have been living witnesses to large amounts of it. All those months after months of skies obscured by wildfire smoke coming from forests that shouldn't have been burning. Now, wouldn't have been burning before we hit this stretch in our history. If you want to understand climate change easily right now, where we stand, I think the most important single fact is simply that warm air holds more water vapor than cold. And so in arid areas, we get more evaporation and more drought and then more fire. Once that water is up in the air, it's going to come down. So we get more deluge and more flood. Um, and we see that every day around this planet now, more and more and more. The last 3 years have been the hottest 3 years that we've ever recorded on this Earth. It looks like now we're going to get a big El Nino beginning sometime between July and September. If that's true, 2027 will almost certainly break all those records and we'll see yet more chaos underway. But now, along with that daily toll, we're starting to see more systemic damage to the planet. If you look at the biggest physical systems on Earth, they're now beginning to shift in uncomfortable ways. The jet stream draws its power from the temperature differential between the equator and the poles. As we've melted ice at the poles and warmed that place dramatically, that temperature differential has decreased, and now the jet stream works in funky, weird ways, gets stuck in these high amplitude loops. On one side, you get drought, on the other side, flood, on and on and on. Um, And in my part of the world, I live in the East Coast, the great currents of the Atlantic, the Gulf Stream, and the other big currents that are the biggest heat distribution engine on planet Earth, they've begun to flicker and falter as that melting ice in Greenland and in the pack ice of the Arctic changes the salinity and hence the density of waters in the North Atlantic. And that in turn undercuts the function of that giant conveyor belt that draws that warm water north from the equator. The biggest things on Earth now are starting to break down, and they're doing it in real time. This now changes month to month, year to year. We're not even talking about decades anymore as the kind of uh, you know, ruler for which to measure this change. It's happening extremely fast. That's the grim climate news. And it comes alongside pretty grim, I think, political news from much of the world. The descent of too much of the planet, including my own country, the United States, into a kind of authoritarianism. Um, we are endlessly apologetic, many of us down here below the border, for the absurd rhetoric and actions of our White House in relation to Canada. We don't know what to do about it except try to beat them, although we've done some other things too. Third Act, this group that I've organized of older Americans, people over the age of 60, of which there's now about 120,000 of us. We did mark Canada Day by going to the consulates and embassies that we could find around the country and singing "Oh Canada" outside, just to say, don't think that all or even most Americans want any part of the nonsense that our government's up to. But of course, it's not just our government. Across the planet, we're seeing a rise in this kind of authoritarianism. So, with those two dark things happening, I'm going to tell you about the one big good thing that's happening on planet Earth. And I'm going to suggest that it's big enough and good enough that it allows us to imagine taking a bite out of both the climate and authoritarianism crises. And that one big good thing is the sudden, very sudden, and very rapid rise in clean energy around the planet. This is really a story of the last 36 months or so. Sometime earlier this decade, humanity crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to produce energy from the sun and the wind than from setting things on fire, coal, gas, oil. That was a pretty epochal moment for human civilization because we've been burning stuff from the start. Darwin said that fire and language were the two things that set our species apart. The archaeologists think it's about 700,000 years ago that we started kindling fires, all pretty good. We were able to cook food. That gave us the big brain. We could move north and south from the equator. The anthropologists even think that standing around the campfire at night for eons helps account for some of the social bonds that mark our species. Think of the campfire as a kind of proto-Zoom, you know? Um, and then when we learned to control the combustion of oil and gas and coal, we called that the Industrial Revolution, and it produced modernity, everything around us. So basically, fire good, except now fire not so good because of the complications. The biggest and most important of those complications is the climate crisis. Raising the temperature of the planet is by far the most important thing that humans have ever done, with the most onerous implications. But it's not the only thing. 9 million human beings each year die. That's about one death in five on this planet from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel, those particulates that lodge in the lungs. Um, and the third thing that I think we're now coming to appreciate more and more is that as long as we depend on, for our energy, on supplies of fuel that are only available in a few places, the people who control those places will end up with more wealth and more power than they can productively use. Hence, Vladimir Putin using his winnings to, um, well, to launch a land war in Europe in the 21st century. Hence, the King of Saudi Arabia. Hence, the Koch brothers, the biggest oil and gas barons in my country, systematically degrading our democracy. Hence, perhaps in a sense, the role that Alberta has come to play in Canada's politics. Um, it's very beautiful to imagine replacing all of that. The climate change, the pollution, the political power with the sun and the wind, which are available to everyone everywhere. And increasingly, over the last 36 months, this is what we're doing. It's been the biggest industrial project maybe in history. We don't see it always so much because it's so centered in China. About half of all the clean energy has been built there. But the scale at which they're doing it, the pace, just proves how easy it would be to do elsewhere too. Last spring, the Chinese were building 3 gigawatts of solar panels a day. A gigawatt's the rough equivalent of a large coal-fired power plant. One of those was going up every 8 hours. I mean, come on. Um, that's spread. Mm, California, they've put up enough solar panels now that most days California produces 100% of the energy that it uses for electricity that it uses for long stretches from renewable sources. At night, when the sun goes down, the biggest source of supply on their grid are batteries that have been soaking up excess sunshine all afternoon. Those batteries didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago. Uh, California has now been surpassed by Texas as the state putting up the most clean energy, which is pretty remarkable because it's also, of course, the world headquarters of the hydrocarbon industry. Um, but the economics are very compelling. In the developing world, we see beautiful stories. Pakistan, where not a government program, just people with armed with TikTok videos, YouTube videos, figuring out how to snap together the cheap Chinese solar panels that have been flooding across their border. They've been able, excuse me, they've been able to build about half, the equivalent of about half the country's national electric grid out of solar panels in the course of a year or two. Now Africa is solarizing faster than any place on the planet, uh, except except the country that's putting them up faster than any other place on earth right now is the country of Cuba, for obvious reasons. Their oil supply from Venezuela has been shut off because our president wants it for himself. Um, he's now in charge. And so they're doing what they can to survive. Another reminder of this nexus around authoritarianism and oil. Um, when all of this adds up correctly, the results are really quite staggering. Australia has put up enough solar panels now that beginning on the 1st of June, every Australian is going to get 3 free hours of electricity every afternoon forever. It's literally grown cheap enough that there's no point in metering it. And so for those 3 hours, people will schedule their washing machine and charge their car, and they'll go out and are buying the increasingly cheap storage batteries that will allow them to fill them in the afternoon and then run their home at night. Um, this is a powerful, powerful moment. Everybody has much to hope for from this. Not, I'm afraid, an end to climate change. Too late for that. But for the first time, a tool with which to begin to slow it down, perhaps to shave tenths of a degree off how hot we eventually make the planet. And every tenth of a degree that we raise the temperature moves another 100 million people out of a safe climate zone to a perilous one. So a big deal. The only people who aren't happy about this are people who own coal mines and oil wells, because all of a sudden we're talking about reducing the extraordinary value of their underground reserves of fossil fuel, which at the moment amount to tens of trillions of dollars in value, but will result in very little if the world instead is running on clean energy. So they are doing everything that they can to stop it. You know more what that looks like in Canada than I do, though from a distance, what it looks like is the ongoing um, power play from the oil province. In my country, it's just crass, corrupt political gamesmanship. Candidate Trump told big oil executives that if they gave him $1 billion in donations, he would give them whatever they want. They gave him about $500 million in donations and advertising and lobbying expenses in the last election cycle. And that was enough. He's, in fact, done far more, I think, even than they expected him to, shutting down 90% finished wind farms off the coast of New England or putting all federal land off limits to solar panels. It's crazy. And that's why we're doing our best to stand up to it. Um, we began in last fall this event that we called Sun Day. And it was a wonderful day across America. We had about 500 events. And in the wake of them, big legislative pushes in most of the 50 states to make it easier to permit solar panels and to make it legal to use the kind of balcony solar or plug-in solar rigs that have swept Europe in the last few years. Solar rigs so simple that you don't even need an electrician. You just stick a plug into your wall and the power from your solar panel flows into your house. And we will continue to do that. There's going to be another Sun Day in 2027, and it'll be a global celebration this time of renewable energy and its possibilities. And we will let you know all about it. But for the moment, you can go to sunday.earth and join in, among other things, just producing some of the art that marked this last big celebration. Because the place where I want to close here, and I think that this should be close to the hearts of anyone who lives on the Sunshine Coast, is with the affirmation that this is not just scientifically required and economically pragmatic, it is beautiful. There's a deep human connection to the sun and to the wind that the sun produces. We don't know how prehistoric people thought about things because being prehistoric, they failed to write their thoughts down. But we do know that all the piles of rock they left behind, the thousands of things like Stonehenge around the world, all point to the equinox or the solstice. We know that the minute that humans started inventing myths to explain the world, the first thing they had to explain was how this thing rose over here, set over here, and then got back over here in the morning to rise again. And so there are wonderful tales the world round of giant ostriches swallowing up the sun and vomiting it forth in the morning. I was in Rome in September for a meeting that the new Pope had called to mark the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, the remarkable encyclical that his predecessor, Pope Francis, had put together about climate change. And the new Pope, who was a weirdly normal American, made it clear he was going to follow Francis's path on all of this. He made it clear even better that sometime this year they're going to flip a switch on the solar farm they've been building these last months on the outskirts of Rome. And when they do, the Vatican will be the first fully solar powered nation on planet Earth. When it was my turn to speak, I thanked him for that initiative and said it suggests the mantra under which we should operate going forward. Energy from heaven, not from hell. And I think that that'll get us a long way. I hope that it's the kind of spirit that informs your work at this conference and on the Sunshine Coast and across Canada and around the world. It's desperately what we need. We've been given at the last moment a real opportunity, and it's one that we need to seize. It would be a sin to waste it. Thank you for being a part of this fight.